Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Jay Tanner. Em is still recovering, although she's doing better. It's just been kind of up and down, so we're just giving her a little more time to heal. But in the meantime, I'm going to be looking at issue 11 of the Wonder Twins. This issue focuses on social issues again, except the message is a little concerning when you think about it. It relies very heavily on stereotypes, and then suggests that certain people should be removed from society because of those stereotypes. But stereotypes are no way to judge individual people, and it's really concerning that this message is coming from the heroes of this story. This sounds like something a villain would say, which is pretty disappointing. There's also a lot of weird jokes and references that come out of nowhere, so basically this comic is par for the course with this series. Anyway, this issue is building off of previous events. After Polly and the Scrambler were finally found at the end of issue 6, the house was destroyed and there was an estate sale for all of its contents. A couple bought a computer from it, but that computer ended up housing an artificial intelligence that ended up being a problem. They bring it home and connect it to the internet, but are surprised by the fact that it's aware and can talk to them. They acknowledge that this is probably a bad thing and they should get out now before it's too late, but one of them feels sorry for it for some reason and decides to answer its question. It asks what the internet is, so he says it's how we access and share information, and the program somehow confuses this for communism, which is really weird. Communism isn't exactly known for free information. Kind of the opposite, in fact. The program is unable to connect to the internet and completely take it over, somehow managing to bypass every single cybersecurity protocol, even though it's a very outdated program. But it introduces itself as Kernel 86, the first artificial intelligence program, created by Filo Math in 1986. Although I looked it up and apparently artificial intelligence dates back to the 50s, but I guess we'll just let him believe he's the first. Anyway, Math was forced to shelve the program after it became unstable. It's a little confusing though, because at one point it said it was shelved in 1989, but there's another flashback showing it's still active in 1990, so the timeline is pretty confusing. Where were the editors? Regardless, it's free now and the twins have to deal with it. But this is where our comic picks up, with Kernel 86 having total control over basically every computer in the world. I like the cover for the most part. It shows the twins being overwhelmed by Kernel 86, which is more or less accurate to the book. It's stylized, but it gets the message across. Anyway, the Justice League seems to be relatively helpless against the Colonel. Superman says they have to stop it, but Hawkman can't think of any solutions and questions if they're supposed to punch the internet. Why don't they just call a tech-based superhero? Cyborg, Oracle, Mr. Terrific? Anybody? They do know superheroes do more than just punch things, right? Meanwhile, Mr. Math is happy to be out of the Phantom Zone and excited to get home, so he's crushed to see the house destroyed when they arrive. This poor man, he's been through so much. So the kids take him to a fast food joint, where they explain that everything they own has been sold off in an estate sale. Mr. Math remembers Kernel 86 and gets worried about it getting loose, but the twins dismiss this because it's an obsolete program and what's the worst it can do, which is what I would assume too. This thing uses floppy disks, but apparently not. But then the gas station next door explodes out of nowhere, and with no explanation. The weird thing is we aren't shown them doing anything about it. It's only in these two panels. It's pretty bad too. There's a man on fire, but all we get is Jaina commenting on how it's probably not related to Kernel 86. I don't really think that matters though. What matters is that the gas station exploded and there's a man on fire, and there's probably more victims involved too. I'm sure they helped off panel, but I'm not even sure why this was included in the comic. It doesn't add anything to the story, and it's not addressed after this page. It's just a really weird thing to include, and the heroes treat it pretty nonchalantly. But it cuts back to the couple, and Kernel 86 wants to invest their money, so he accesses their entire life savings and invests it all in Blockbuster Video, so they lose all of their money. Kernel 86 also takes over the computer in a jetliner, and decides that planes don't need computers, so it shuts it off, causing the plane to go down. Luckily, Superman was there to catch it, but is this the only plane it took over? What if it brings down other jetliners? Too bad they can't find a way to counteract this thing. But instead, apparently the only way to take it down is by going to the source computer, so they try to track down who bought it. Unfortunately, Kernel 86 made it so you can't access the internet at all. Did I mention this thing is 30 years old and uses floppy disks? This all seems like a real stretch, but since the internet isn't an option, they have to go to Washington DC to access the public records. And for some reason, Miss Temple is here, even though she works at their school library in Metropolis. I didn't even think we would see her again after the reunion comic, let alone in this context. It then cuts to a Lex news report where they're explaining the situation. Basically, Colonel 86 has taken over the economy and manufacturing, and is trying to reset things back to the way they were in the 80s. This is also when we start getting into the social commentary. But before all that starts, Punditron gets excited about an AI taking over the world, and immediately rallies to the cause, trying to overthrow the studio, because he thinks it's about time the robot uprising started. Meanwhile, the couple decides they have to fight back. Unfortunately, the only hammer they have is this tiny little thing. But he claims he's a software engineer, so this is the best he can do. I don't really get that explanation, but okay. Lesson learned, I guess. Everyone should have certain things in their home, and a basic toolkit is one of them. But his efforts to destroy the computer are useless. And then we get this gem of a line, comparing the computer to Hitler's bunker. Basically, they're saying that the computer is durable and was made to last because it's from the 80s, unlike things today that'll fall apart if you blow on them, like those Nokia phone memes. But this joke is just baffling. What does a computer have to do with Hitler's bunker? They're not even from the same time period. There's a 40-year difference between these decades. At least the Nokia phone was being compared to a modern phone, so they have commonality. I just don't understand the humor in this series, and it's issue 11. Why didn't he reference something from the 80s? Anyway, somehow Lex Luthor made it back to LexCorp, although they never explain what happened to him after he was locked in that warehouse. But I guess it doesn't matter. At least he didn't kill anyone over this. The intern explains that people are bored with the malevolent power structures currently in place and are looking for new ones, and then goes on to explain that Colonel 86 has taken over the world. But Lex gets excited when he finds out that Colonel 86 has acquired a fan base. Apparently a bunch of middle-aged white men who suffer from male pattern baldness have latched on to Colonel 86's train. Apparently they like that he's bringing the world back to a pre-digital era, and muscle shirts. But Lex says they can work with this because it's so old it's new. Retro. The word you're looking for is retro. So they have a panel discussing this on Lex and Balances. Why is Punditron still there? He tried to take over the studio, but they ask him for his opinion, and he says Colonel 86 is the best because humans are too mammalian, and 86 has the necessary disregard for human safety. Yeah, I think Punditron should be deactivated, but instead it's labeled as a hot take. So they move on to Strawman, who says he doesn't think the world should be run by someone who thinks phone booths still exist. Or, you know, thinks that planes should be downed because he doesn't like the way they operate. But admittedly, I'm kind of surprised they wouldn't give a worse take to the Strawman, although he does get fired over it. So they move on to the judge, who says that it might be interesting to see how it plays out. But it looks like she's forced to say something like that instead of it being her actual opinion. Meanwhile, Colonel 86 has taken over most of the technology in the house because of its smart features, and is now trying to attack the couple. But they talk about how even though the situation looks dire, at least they have each other. But Colonel 86 catches on to the fact that they're married and becomes immediately disgusted. I'm not sure why it would care about marriage at all. It's an artificial intelligence. Plus, why does it care about this social issue but seems to be cool with communism? It's supposed to be a commentary on 80s politics. The Cold War was still going on. Ronald Reagan was president. Chernobyl happened. The reunification of Germany. You'd think this thing would stereotypically hate communism, especially if it's supposed to represent middle-aged white men who were in their prime in the 80s. Plus, it seems to focus more on economics and political structure. But for some reason, this is its most important issue, annulling all the same-sex marriages it can find throughout the world, because this is where we're at with superhero comics in 2020. Anyway, the middle-aged white men are happy with Colonel 86 because he gets them, and then 86 gives a call to action to protect his malware, and whoever does will be rewarded with a job in coal mining, which is another swipe at the working class. This comic seems to love to do that. Plus, these are middle-aged men. Are they in the physical condition to do that kind of labor? Why would they need a job in coal mining anyway? I'm willing to bet half these guys are retired. Anyway, they approach a news broadcaster, but Superman and Wonder Woman are there to intervene, and they start throwing their might around. These are middle-aged men. They really don't need to use excessive force against them. Also, that's not how you throw a punch, Wonder Woman. Her body is twisted with her upper and lower half going in opposite directions. All that training throughout her life, and she can't throw a punch here. But I digress. Superman decides to call on Repulso to deal with the riot. I wasn't expecting to see him again, but it makes more sense than the librarian cameo. Anyway, the twins and the mask finally arrive at the house. They assess the situation and aren't happy to see there are hostages, but Polly promises she can fix the program if they get her inside. So Jaina transforms into a ram and smashes her way into the house, while Zan floods it, short-circuiting all the devices. So now the couple have lost all their money and their home, but they try to look on the bright side. So Polly tries to update its programming, but now it's saying that it was programmed in 1988, even though we've been told it was 1986. That's even in its name. So nothing about this timeline adds up. Seriously, where were the editors? But the kernel ends up spitting out the floppy disk. Apparently it won't allow itself to be updated. I guess it's part of some kind of self-preservation thing, but it all seems a bit convenient to me. But Mr. Math comes in saying he has to do what needs to be done, so he addresses Kernel 86 directly. He says that sometimes a program refuses to be updated, so there's no choice other than to shut it down. So he permanently deletes Kernel 86. Somehow. I guess he has some kind of master control? Anyway, the issue is that they apply this message to the people who are protesting, even though they're exaggerated one-dimensional stereotypes, because the speech gets exposited over the protests, and Repulso also says something in a similar vein, although he doesn't go as far as to say they should all die. He just says that the world is constantly changing and it's important for them to change with it. I'm a little confused as to why Repulso would defend society though, considering the fact that he's been victimized by it. He's a man with a medical condition, but society locks him up and then throws him into dangerous situations whenever it's convenient for them. Where's the change for him? He didn't deserve this. He seems like a nice guy who's forced to be miserable. It just seems weird for him to give a speech like this. Mr. Math is upset about losing Kernel 86 even though he knows it was for the best, but it was his first creation, so I get it. Meanwhile, the twins are outside gawking at the protesters shamefully walking home. Zan questions how so many people could have been taken in with the Colonel since he was such a monster, but Jaina says it wasn't the Colonel they appreciated, it's just that it allowed them to be monsters too, which she says as they watch the couple. So according to this comic, the 80s sucked and the people who were young back then are monsters. Or at least the white men are. Something that's really concerning about this series is how much it relies on and encourages stereotypes, not to mention often relying on ridiculous situations to drive the plot. And this was the weirdest critique of the 80s I've ever heard, and I don't see how it reflected the time period. So yeah, more weird, convoluted writing. But that was my opinion. What do you guys think? Only one issue left. Sorry our uploads for this series were so erratic, but at least it's almost over. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members, Caleb Nelson, Stutania, and Tyrant Carnivore. Thank you so much for becoming members, and I'd like to thank all of you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. Em is improving. It's just been slow, but hopefully she should be joining me soon. I just don't want to rush her. But thanks again for watching. I'll leave our links to our GoFundMe and Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.